Imagine standing at the edge of a jagged limestone cliff in ancient Lycia. The air doesn't smell like the sea, even though the Mediterranean is just miles away. Instead, it smells of scorched hair and the heavy metallic tang of hot copper. You hear a sound that shouldn't be possible. The low, rumbling purr of a lion, the frantic bleat of a goat, and the dry, rhythmic hiss of a goat, and the dry, rhythmic hiss of a serpent, all vibrating from the same set of lungs. This is the moment before the world stops making sense. For centuries, we've been told the Chimera was just a messy collage of nightmares, a clumsy myth stitched together by poets who didn't understand biology. But when you look at the evidence left behind in the charred earth and the silent ruins, you start to realize that the Chimera wasn't just a monster. It was a warning. And that warning is more relevant in 2026 than it has ever been in human history. In the shadows of the Cragus Mountains, the earth itself seems to breathe fire. Even today, vents of eternal flame erupt from the ground, fueled by pockets of methane that have burned for millennia. To the ancients, this wasn't geology. It was the breath of a beast buried alive. Think of a young scout, perhaps 19 years old, sent by King Iobates to track the source of the missing livestock. He finds a clearing where the grass has been turned to black glass. He doesn't see a monster at first. He sees the footprints claws of a feline, hooves of a mountain grazer, and the dragging weight of a heavy tail. His mind tries to rationalize it. He thinks he's tracking 3 different animals hunting in a pack. But the tracks never diverge. They move as one. They breathe as one. They breathe as one. They breathe as one. The terror of the Chimera isn't just its lethality. It's the violation of the natural order. It's the feeling that the laws of life have been broken by something far older and more cruel than man. Before we go any deeper into the blood-soaked history of the Lycian beast, stop for a moment and look at the palm of your hand. If you think a creature with multiple sets of DNA is a fantasy, you should know that modern medicine finds human chimeras every single year. People who absorbed a twin in the womb and carry 2 entirely different genetic codes within one body. If it can happen to us, what was stopping it from happening then? If you stayed with me this far, you're starting to see that the line between myth and mutation is thinner than a razor's edge. But wait until you hear what the archaeologists found hidden beneath the Temple of Apollo, because it changes everything we thought we knew about the hero who supposedly killed the beast. The story tells us that Bellerophon, riding the winged horse Pegasus, ended the Chimera's reign of terror by shoving a lead-tipped spear into its throat. The beast's own fiery breath melted the lead, searing its vitals from the inside out. It's a clean, heroic ending. But the deep lore suggests something far more disturbing. The villagers of Lycia didn't celebrate the beast's death. They feared its absence. They believed the Chimera was a biological seal, a guardian of a gateway that was never meant to be opened. You see, the Chimera was said to be the offspring of Typhon and Echidna beings, so ancient and chaotic that the gods themselves trembled at their names. By killing the mutation, Bellerophon didn't save the kingdom. He broke the lock on a much larger cage. There are scrolls tucked away in the darker corners of the Vatican and private collections that claim the fire of the Chimera wasn't just heat. It was a form of radioactive decay that the ancients didn't have the words to describe. They called it divine light or hellfire. But the symptoms the survivors described, the falling hair, the weeping sores, the children born with mixed features, sound hauntingly like something from a modern nuclear wasteland. Take another breath. If this was just a story, why did the Roman historian Pliny the Elder insist that the mountain was still burning with a fire that did not consume? Why did the local cults continue to offer sacrifices to a dead monster for 500 years after its supposed execution? Maybe it's because the Chimera isn't a single creature, but a cycle. In 1924, a team of explorers in the Anatolian region found a series of tunnels lined with fused silicate sand turned to glass by extreme localized heat. There were no volcanic vents in that specific cave system. There was only a pile of bones that defied classification. Not one skeleton, but hundreds fused together in a way that suggested they had grown that way. Bones of lions and goats knitted into a singular, agonizing architecture. It wasn't a burial ground. It was a laboratory. This leads us to the distorted truth that the poets were too afraid to write down. What if the Chimera wasn't a product of the gods, but a remnant of a lost era of genetic manipulation? We like to think of ourselves as the first ones to play with the building blocks of life. But the myths of the Chimera, the Manticore, and the Sphinx suggest a world that was once a playground for architects who didn't care about the sanctity of a species. The real horror isn't a lion with a goat's head growing out of its back. The real horror is the intent behind it. Why would something create a living weapon that is in constant physical pain, whose very existence is a war between three different nervous systems? Perhaps the fire it breathed wasn't a weapon for us, but a desperate attempt to incinerate its own corrupted flesh. When you look at the modern push for synthetic biology and the creation of human-pig hybrids for organ harvesting, the Chimera stops being a monster from a storybook and starts looking like a mirror. Stops being a monster from a storybook and starts looking like a mirror. As the sun sets over the ruins of Lycia today, the methane fires still flicker in the dark, dancing over the rocks like ghosts. They say that if you sit in the silence long enough, you can still hear that triple-toned breath echoing from the deep cracks in the earth. It's a sound that reminds us that nature has a long memory and a very short patience for those who try to stitch together what was meant to stay apart. We spent thousands of years convinced we had slain the monsters of the past, but we never stopped to ask if we were just clearing the way for their return. Next time you hear a sound in the woods that you can't quite identify, a cry that sounds like two different animals screaming at once, don't look for a pack. Look for the one thing that should be impossible. Because the earth doesn't forget its mistakes, and sometimes it brings them back to life. Does the fire still burn because the beast is dead? Or is it burning because the beast is finally waking up?